I'm Nikki Jovikic from Lookupstrata and I'm your host today. We're speaking about navigating strata bylaws in Western Australia. We all know how time-consuming and frustrating dealing with bylaw breaches can be. And for strata managers, building managers, owners and council members, it can feel like a constant battle. But the good news is there is a better way. Today we're joined by Luke Downie from Realmark Strata. Luke will share his insights and practical strategies to help you prevent bylaw breaches before they occur, de-escalate tensions when they do arise, and take the right steps to resolve issues efficiently and effectively. Whether you're a seasoned strata professional or just starting out on the council, this session has something for you. We'll be covering preventative measures, communication techniques, and actionable steps you can use right away to create a more peaceful and harmonious community for everyone in your strata scheme. Let's find out how to turn those bylaw headaches into a distant memory. Before we begin, we'd also like to mention that the information in this session, including the discussions arising from submitted questions and chat conversations, is not legal advice or financial advice and should not be relied upon as advice. You should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in the session. We welcome Luke Downie from Realmark Strata. Most people find strata to be a dry subject, but talk to Luke about strata legislation and you'll soon see how enthusiastic and excited he becomes about the topic. He's had over 20 years in the industry. Luke owned and operated his own strata management business in Perth for over 10 years, as well as being the state lecturer in strata management at Central TAFE at that time. Educating people on strata title has been a passion. Luke has regularly delivered strata information sessions, and in his spare time, his passions are family, fishing, fine dining, and football. He also volunteers to assist Perth's homeless community, and he's a regular contributor to Lookupstrata. Thanks for joining us, Luke. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you for joining us this morning, where we're going to be looking at bylaw breach resolution and enforcement. So what we're going to be covering this morning is common causes of bylaw breaches, prevention, the breaching process itself, and enforcement. With each of these topics, I'm not going to be delving into the legislation surrounding bylaws and bylaw breaching. This session's designed more to give you some suggestions and ideas that you may be able to use, mostly to help prevent bylaw breaching or to reduce the number of bylaw breaches in your strata title scheme. Here we have a list of common breach causes, or a list that I believe to be common breach causes. The first being lack of knowledge and understanding. And for any strata managers that are joining us today, I think you would agree that a lack of knowledge and understanding of what bylaws apply to a strata scheme is probably the number one cause. So that's the first cause I've got there. A sense of frustration or unresolved tension often leads to bylaw breaches. I'm sure anybody involved in strata have had circumstances such as somebody that turns their music up full blast because the neighbour next door parked in their parking bay. So it's that sort of revenge action that leads to a breach of bylaws is quite a common thing as well. Cultural differences. Cultural differences and the next one, social norms, are sort of similar because a lot of the time cultural differences result in or lead to a difference in social norms. And what I'm talking about there is where people have a different perception of what is socially acceptable and what is not. So sometimes that can lead to breach of bylaws. When people are going through trauma or events is also another common cause for bylaw breaches. If people are having a difficult time, often they're a little bit more lapsed in terms of providing lack of respect to other people, particularly if what they're dealing with is fairly serious. And the last one, which is lack of sense of belonging, is one that I'm going to spend a bit of time on today because, believe it or not, I feel it's probably the second largest contributing factor to bylaw breaches. And I'm going to explain why when we go through the presentation this morning. So community is the key. And this is where that sense of belonging comes into it, because the reality is that if you create a sense of community inside a strata scheme, it will undoubtedly reduce the likelihood of breaches occurring, and it will certainly reduce the number of breaches of occurring. And when you think about it, the reason why is when somebody feels like they belong and feel like they're a part of the community, they're less likely to want to upset the other members of that community. When they feel isolated and feel like they're not a part, the consequences of them breaching a bylaw are far less relevant to them. So they care less about it. So by creating a sense of community inside a strata scheme, what you're doing is you're creating a happy environment where not only are people less likely to breach, but they're more likely to be able to resolve any differences without getting to the stage of having to issue a breach. So how do we go about creating communities inside strata? So I'm going to cover some suggestions on how you can do that. And use of common property is a huge one, shared spaces. So I've got some suggestions there: community gardens, barbecue areas, or meeting places. Essentially what we're talking about here is creating areas that are going to bring people together. If you bring people together, they're going to get to know each other more, and they're certainly going to have a more sense of community. Social interaction and scheme events is another great way. Leads into those shared spaces, because you can hold social events in your common area spaces that you create. It might be a movie night, it might be a morning tea, but certainly if strata schemes make an effort to create social interaction and hold events inside their strata scheme, people are certainly going to feel like they belong more so. Inclusivity is an important factor. If people feel left out, they certainly don't feel part of a community. And it's one of the things strata schemes don't do very well, in my opinion, is include tenants in the equation. So tenants are often the cause of bylaw breaches. If they feel a part of that community, the same effect or the same impact is going to have as if it was an owner. So I encourage strata schemes to include tenants in any activities. Conversation, get to know your neighbours. Having a conversation with your neighbour and knowing a little bit about them certainly, again, helps to create that sense of community. It's surprising how often people don't even know the people that live right next door to them. Communication is a big thing. So if strata schemes or strata companies are communicating with the people inside the scheme, owners, visitors, tenants, etc., letting them know what's going on, letting them know how things operate, that in itself also helps to create that sense of community and plays a huge part in regards to reducing bylaw breaches. Having conflict resolution mechanisms. So again, not having these in place really does lead to a lot more breaches. If you have a set process and it's communicated in terms of how conflict is to be dealt with in the scheme, and make that process available to everybody that's involved in the scheme, there's going to be less breaches also, because you're giving people the tools they need in order to be able to attempt to resolve differences. So what can a strata manager do to assist a strata scheme in creating a sense of community? So certainly assisting with communication, setting up the process for communication is also important. Strata schemes having a set communication process is a really good idea, so that everybody knows if we've got an issue or if there's a certain thing they need to achieve, whether it's getting an access device or booking a facility in the strata company, that it's clear to them on how they go about that can assist. Providing ideas and encouragement to the strata scheme. So ideas can be in relation to the use of common property or events, and encourage them to hold those events and to go through those processes. Set communication is a great thing, and I've mentioned welcome booklets there. Welcome booklets or even a welcome video are a great way of making people feel like they're a part of the community, because the more they know about the community, the more they're going to feel like they belong. The sort of things that you would include and cover in a welcome booklet would be things like what facilities are available to them, what are the bin days, summarise the bylaws, how they can communicate, what are the emergency procedure, and those types of things, so that they have a great understanding of how the strata company works and what's available to them inside the strata scheme. Setting out the expectations and circulating this on a regular basis. Tonality is important here, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But letting people know what the expectation is for people living inside the strata scheme. And what I'm talking about there is it acceptable to be playing loud music after 10 o'clock at night? What is the expectations for those people that are living there? It might be a complex where leaving your porch light on is not after a certain time at night is not considered acceptable. So really outlining what the group as a general, community in general, feels is acceptable and not acceptable. So outlining that certainly will help reduce the number, because At the end of the day, if people don't know, then there's more chance that they're going to annoy or create a breach. And sending regular reminders out, I mentioned that, but sending regular reminders out of those expectations is important. And having procedures in place. So I've already talked about communication procedures, dispute resolution procedures, procedures for ordering devices, etc. All of those things help make people feel more a part of that community. And the strata manager can certainly assist the strata scheme in setting up a conflict resolution, and if necessary, potentially be involved in that conflict resolution process. Now I'm going to look at what committee members themselves can do to help create that sense of community. Introduce yourself, particularly to new people in the scheme, or perhaps there's people in your scheme that you don't already know. Introducing yourself, what that does is, for people coming into the scheme, first and foremost, they already know somebody. You've made the effort to introduce yourself, so they feel like they know somebody in the scheme, and they feel like there's more of a sense of belonging. It's a good idea to mention that you're on a committee and give them a bit of information about the complex in that conversation. What that tells that person is that you do have a community there, that there is an active committee, and it's more likely to be a better environment for them understanding that. Lead by example. For committee members, it can't be a matter of do as I say, not as I do, because essentially what will result if committee members themselves are not following the expectations and stepping outside of what the social norms are, then everybody else in the scheme is going to think it's okay as well. It's important that bylaws are applied evenly to all members inside a strata scheme. Organising social events, I've talked on that already, so I won't cover that too much more. Providing lines of communication with the Council of Owners. So people inside a scheme want to be able to communicate with the committee. At the end of the day, the committee are the decision makers. So it's important to clearly identify and outline what those lines of communication are. Now, I understand in some schemes, committee members may not want direct communication, and that's understandable. At the end of the day, it's a voluntary position and it takes a lot of time. My opinion is it doesn't negate the need for that communication process. It may be just that the communication process is through the strata manager, in which case outline how that works and what time frame that person should expect in terms of response. Creating inviting spaces and encouraging their use. So it's one thing creating a common area space for use, it's another thing them being used. So I think it's important for the committee to encourage their use as well. Let people know what the space is about, give them some suggestions and ideas of what the space is designed for. Involve the committee in decision making. Now, committee members themselves have to make a lot of decisions, and it can be tiring work sometimes. Sometimes they cop a bit of heat as well from the decisions that they make. Consider having, when you're making decisions, some of those decisions you might be able to have a survey of the people who are in the complex to see what they want. Not only does it assist and help you in that decision-making process, but it provides a voice for the people inside of the community, and again, gives them a sense that they really belong to that community. Involving them in the projects that the strata company is carrying out. So it might be that you have a busy bee and invite people along, or it might be that you form a subcommittee on a particular project that the strata company is working on, and invite people to form part of that subcommittee, which was the next point I've got there. And the last one there is celebrate and recognise. And what I mean by this is to help create more of a sense of community, celebration is a great way to go about it. And the types of things you might want to celebrate is completion of a project. Years in a complex, for example. I know one complex that celebrates people's birthdays. It might be that some people may not want to share their birthday, but if you're in a community where people are prepared to do that, celebrating a birthday and having a few drinks in a barbecue area or something like that can certainly help create a sense of community. Prevention. So the list I have here is a list of the ways in which to work on preventing bylaws breaches from occurring, and I've talked already on creating communities, creating awareness. So I talked earlier about the bylaws in particular, so making sure that people are aware of what the bylaws are, but also what do the bylaws mean. So making sure that the bylaws are readily available to people and that they have a clear understanding of them. Creating awareness also in regards to expectations that I talked about earlier. Communicating, I've talked a lot on that. I won't cover that in much more detail, but certainly communication is a key part to ensuring you keep the level of breaches down. Resolving tensions with solutions, so having that dispute resolution process and being able to provide or facilitate solutions to the problems that exist. And it may be that two people in a strata scheme, there's tension between them, they're having a dispute, but there's something the strata company can do, whether it's a change to the way the strata scheme runs or a change to the common property that's going to assist in resolving that tension. If a strata company has the ability to do that, then of course I would encourage it. Approach first breach nicely. So what I mean by that is tonality and language used is fairly important, particularly when you're first raising an issue with somebody. At the end of the day, people don't necessarily respond very well to an aggressive or direct a dictatorship style of communication. Being assertive is okay, but coming across as I guess you can say, a dictator, certainly it won't net the right results. Ensuring your bylaws are reasonable. So at the end of the day, it's one thing having a set of bylaws and issuing breach notices, but you need to review your bylaws on a regular basis to make sure that they are reasonable and applicable to your scheme. There are some schemes that have outdated bylaws that really don't fit well with today's living styles. So I would encourage strata schemes to review your bylaws on a regular basis. It's okay to review them regularly and make sure that they really do suit the community environment. Now, I've talked briefly on tone, but I'm going to cover that a little bit more. So just a few ideas of things to do from the community aspect. Notice boards and web pages are a great idea. It provides a form of communication. Some strata schemes choose to use tech such as WhatsApp groups to create an opportunity for people to communicate with each other inside the strata schemes, which is a great idea. Creating resources, so I talked about processes and procedures, etc., for strata schemes. Let people know what's happening in the broader community. So think outside the square. When you're communicating, there's nothing stopping strata schemes from letting people know what's happening in the local community as well that may be of interest to them. It also will help create that sense of community. Things like movie nights. Why not an Easter egg hunt? I don't think anyone's ever too old for an Easter egg hunt. I certainly like the chocolate. Community book exchange is another great idea. Competitions, guess who? So the idea there, which is an idea I pinched from a strata scheme I managed years ago, was they used to put out a few fun facts about a person living in the strata scheme, and there was a competition in order for people to guess who that person was. It was a really great way of them getting to know each other, and I'd certainly encourage the use of that system. Having busy bees, I mentioned earlier, morning teas, have a fundraiser or community charity that you can all work towards. It could even be that you're just using containers for change that everyone contributes to. But if you're going to do that, make sure people are aware of the achievement. So don't just collect and donate the funds from the cans. Let people know, hey, we donated this much to this charity, so that they feel that they've contributed and they feel that they're part of it. If it's not containers for change, maybe there are other activities that the strata scheme can look into that can assist or help a charity in your area. So when you do have breaches occur and you do need to issue a breach notice, I think the approach is vital. A lot of the time things steamroll out of control because of the approach that's used, which can lead to further breaches. So I encourage people to really reassess and evaluate how you approach a breach process. I talked about language before, and I mentioned that language is essential. Tonality is huge. You don't want to be pointing the finger at people and telling them they're a bad person. You want, because a lot of the time they're unaware that they've done the wrong thing to begin with. So the language used, as I said, is vital. I encourage people to have a conversation. Speak to the person that created the breach. Give them a clearer understanding of the concerns. But I encourage strata managers, before you send a breach notice, pick up the phone, speak to the person, but don't approach it with, you've done this, I want to know why. My suggestion is that you ring them up and say, look, I've been told and I've heard, I'd love to know or hear your side of the story or your opinion, and then take the time to listen to what they've got to say. It may be that you still need to issue a breach notice, but the one thing that you will get out of that conversation is you'll have a better understanding of why the breach occurred in the first place. That gives you the knowledge you need in order to potentially make some changes or address concerns in order to resolve further breaches from occurring. So listening clearly to what people have to say is vital in these situations. When you are sending out a breach notice, communicate clearly. Make sure that you're clearly stating what the breach is about, clearly stating the bylaw, and clearly stating what the person needs to do to ensure that they rectify the breach. Provide reasons and explanations. A lot of the time people don't struggle or have a hard time understanding, well, I know this is a bylaw, but it doesn't make sense to me. Why is it wrong to do this? So giving them a level of understanding about the impact or the effect of that breach on other people is also an important part of the process. So just to summarize there in terms of the breach notices, make sure you're providing the exact bylaw, state what the evidence is that's being relied upon, be clear on the action that the person needs to take, and ensure that you're attaching the explanation of effect. Okay, knowing when to step it up. So it's one thing me sitting here today and telling you to take the softly approach and being all nice, but there are times when we have to step it up, being more assertive in the way that we approach it, and potentially take the matter to the State Administrative Tribunal. So here in Western Australia, if you've issued multiple breaches under the same bylaw, or if the breach is severe enough, the avenue that we have for resolution is through the State Administrative Tribunal. And it's important that you're prepared for that process. So even in the very start, when you're having those conversations with people about things they've done, and you're taking that more softly approach, it's important to document everything at that stage, because if the situation does progress, you're going to be relying upon that information to ensure that you can take this matter forward and take it forward successfully. Make sure you've got the evidence that you're relying upon, whether it's witness statements, whether it's CCTV footage, whatever it is, police reports, whatever it is that you're relying upon, make sure you've saved it. Know your bylaws. Make sure that you are issuing, that the action that's been taken is a valid breach and that you are issuing a breach under the right bylaw. And it's always important for strata companies to consider whether or not they should engage the services of a legal practitioner or lawyer specialising in strata if they're going to take the matter to the State Administrative Tribunal. So when you go down that process of enforcement, my advice is don't wait. So if it's got to that stage where you should be applying to the State Administrative Tribunal to resolve a matter, sometimes people are worried or concerned about the process. So they sit on it and hope that it goes away. I can guarantee you most of the time it won't. The situation's likely to fester, become worse and harder to resolve. So when you're in that situation, I encourage you to take that step if it's necessary. Also understanding that the strata company itself has a statutory obligation to enforce the bylaws, and if this is the stage that you're at, then you should be taking that avenue. Be prepared to participate in the process. This is more for council of owners. Often when you're going through an enforcement process through the State Administrative Tribunal, the council of owners are expecting the strata manager and or the lawyer to handle it without their involvement. The reality is that it's vital for the council of owners to participate in this process, and often SAT won't move forward unless you have council representation there on some occasions. Make others aware. So make people in the scheme aware that the matter is going to the State Administrative Tribunal, and make them aware of the outcomes. The purpose of that is it shows the people in the scheme that the strata company is prepared to enforce the bylaws, and it demonstrates to them that the strata company will go to that length if necessary in relation to bylaw breaches. It also provides those that do the right thing with the sense of, I want to say satisfaction, it's probably not the right word, but the sense of comfort knowing that if people do the wrong thing, that it's going to be dealt with. be organised. So that's about having everything in order and being prepared to take that step. And as I mentioned before, consider representation in terms of legal representation. So that pretty much brings me to the end. I have a list of resources here which Nikki will make available for anybody that may want to take a look at them. These resources that I'm providing are links that are very useful in terms of assisting strata schemes in creating that sense of community. Thank you.
There are a couple of questions that came up in chat that are pertinent to the presentation link, so we might just cover those first. There was a statement, we used to do wine and cheese nights, quiz nights too. It was fun. Mum and bub morning teas for those who are new to the city. I thought that was a good point to share as well.
I like the wine and cheese night idea.
Busy bees, what is the insurance ramifications around injury on strata insurance when owners, occupiers, tenants doing stuff around the property? I've witnessed an owner in one case picking up a broom or a rake and using it, and then oh my back, I think I've injured my back.
It's a really good question. First and foremost, before proceeding down the lines of a busy bee, I would encourage strata companies to discuss that with their insurer and make sure you've got the required coverage. Most strata schemes would have voluntary workers cover under their insurance policy, but in the first instance, you should always have that conversation with your insurer or broker prior to proceeding.
Okay, thank you. And also a question about SAT. Who is best to submit a SAT application and who pays?
It really depends on the circumstances. So in any dispute that can't be resolved inside a strata scheme, if somebody wants to take it forward, so that entity or person are the ones that would make the application. So for a strata company in relation to bylaw breaching, the onus would be on the strata company to take that matter to SAT to ensure the enforcement of the bylaws.
What can we do when a council of owner member is the one committing the breach? The council member thinks it's fine for them and other residents to swap their parking bays for one that's more convenient. This is against what is on the Landgate documents. It's creating parking chaos. What do we do about this?
So it can happen where committee members are responsible for breach of bylaws. The one thing I will say is everybody's human at the end of the day. I guess the important thing is how committee members respond when they're in the firing line, so to speak. When I talked about leading by example, I think it's important when a committee member is in that position to take responsibility and demonstrate it's okay to be wrong sometimes and accept responsibility, that it's all right for that. But for people on the other side of that coin, when they are in a situation where they feel like a committee member won't take responsibility and is not doing something about it, I would strongly recommend or suggest that the concerns are raised in writing with the strata company and the committee as a whole, and request mediation. Ask for the opportunity to sit down and try and resolve it with the strata company. If that doesn't work, then of course the avenue for resolving any disputes inside a strata scheme in Western Australia that can't be resolved in-house is through the State Administrative Tribunal.
Okay, wonderful. And we've just been asked, does anyone have a flow chart or specific steps on the breach complaint process, including the SAT next steps? Do you know of anything like that, Luke?
Not off the top of my head. The breach process itself is fairly clearly outlined in Western Australia, but just that next step in terms of the steps for further enforcement is not really something I've seen documented as a guide, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We might look into that as well and see if we can get something to supply to people. Are the council of owners breaching a bylaw if they don't enforce a bylaw that's being breached by a resident? Unit A's pot plant block Unit B's view of the river. Unit B has requested the pots be moved to another spot that does not block the view and interfere with their enjoyment of neighbouring lots. The council of owners are treating this as a neighbourly tiff and telling owners to sort it out amongst themselves. Unit A says they'll not move the pots and they've said take it to SAT. Is the council of owners breaching a bylaw by not enforcing the bylaws, and would Unit B get support from SAT?
So it's very unlikely, without knowing what bylaws are in place for that particular scheme. The one thing I will say is that I think it's highly unlikely that there would be a bylaw that exists that says not enforcing the bylaws is a breach. Having said that, the Act itself puts an obligation on the strata company to uphold the bylaws. So whilst it's not a breach, there is a statutory requirement for the strata company to enforce the bylaws.
What is the best way to approach Department of Communities about their tenants constantly breaching bylaws? We're a small complex of 6. We've tried emails and phone calls, which are being dismissed. Attempts to approach the tenant is not safe due to their abusive and disruptive behaviour. And I'll just jump in there, Luke, before you answer and say that we did a session. You came along and did a session for us, I think about a year ago, which would be pertinent here as well. And we might be able to share that link this afternoon.
Yeah, I think that dispute resolution session would assist. So maybe if we share that link would be great. But this, correct me if I'm wrong, this particular question relates particularly to Department of Communities, Department of Housing. Obviously, the service that they provide is a vital service to our community, and then a lot of the people that they house are in dire situations. So to protect those people, they have their own processes that they have to follow. And, you know, it can be a tough job for them. I do understand that sometimes their tenants can be extremely difficult to deal with, and the processes that they have to follow being so stringent makes it even more difficult to deal with. But I guess what we've got to understand is a lot of the time this is last resort housing for these people, and the next step is out on the street. So you can understand why they have their own processes. Equally, the strata company has their own processes and their own legislation. And this, at the end of the day, the strata company can choose to follow those processes and that legislation and take the matter further, even if it is Department of Housing. I just think that it's important for the strata company in that situation to make sure that they're assessing the situation and make sure that there is a need to take it to that next step. But I would only take it to that next step if you've tried to go through the process of mediation. The one thing I can tell you with the department is that the more you document things and the more you communicate with them helps them. Make sure you're providing them the evidence. Make sure you're providing them with timeframes. A lot of the time people get sick of communicating. They're saying, well, I've already told them 5 or 6 times, but understand the more that you provide them, the easier it is for them to assist you in dealing with that situation.
So would you recommend keeping a diary, Luke, and actually entering in situations that are occurring around the community?
Yeah, look, a diary, yes, maybe. Certainly documenting events, whether it's in a report or, you know, a lot of the time it's best to, things happen at night time, weekends, etc. If you've got the opportunity, maybe just type up an email ready to go so you can send it the next morning straight to the person involved, because it's fresh in your mind, you've got the information at hand, and providing it to those people involved in a timely manner assists them in being able to resolve it quicker as well. The problem with the diary sometimes is that people write things in the diary and it's, you know, they might have 4 or 5 issues and it's 3 weeks later before they report it. And it sometimes delays the processes and makes it harder to deal with.
How do you deal with a difficult council of owner who only know the word no? I asked all on my floor about a container for change on our level, which I would champion. I was happy to manage and champion the bag for containers for change all on my floor, and the council says no. This is creating divide when all I'm doing is educating neighbours on sustainability and creating community by having a conversation when waiting by the lift. How do you deal with difficult, unfriendly council of owners? I ended up doing it anyway and then got a breach, and the strata manager is not good at mediation.
The first part of that question was, how do you deal with a committee member that only says no or only knows the word no? I think one important factor to understand here is that the committee is made up of many members, and the decision making process is a democratic process. So first and foremost, if you're going to approach the committee to make a decision, make sure you do it formally. Put it in writing, address it to the committee. Writing these days, electronic form is fine, so emails suffice. But address it to the council of owners, even if you're sending it through the strata manager, and outline exactly what you're asking, and ask for, in your communication, ask for them to let you know the result of the council of owners decision. but also provide them relevant information. So if you're wanting to implement something in the scheme, do your homework, provide them with some information, explain the benefits. If you go to the committee and say, hey, I think we should do this, and don't provide any background, then it's harder for them to make a decision. Sure, they can do their own research, but again, they are volunteers. They may be working on other projects. So if it's something that you're passionate about or something that you really want to see happen in your strata scheme, I'd urge or encourage you to invest the time in preparing information so that the council can make a valid decision. And don't be afraid to ask if the committee come back to you with a decision that you're not necessarily happy with. Don't be afraid to politely ask them to explain the decision-making process so that you can feel happy that they've given due consideration to the idea.
And is it worthwhile trying to get support, Luke, from other residents in the building, doing a bit of lobbying and seeing if other people feel the same way as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea also. I mean, at the end of the day, the committee are there to represent all parties inside the strata scheme. And they have a statutory obligation to act in the best interests of all proprietors, right? So I think if they've got the majority of owners pointing them in a certain direction, they certainly should be listening.
And we've just had a comment come up in chat, or nominate yourself to be on the committee of owners and change the system from the inside, which is another good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Get involved.
Yeah. Okay. What about a person who acts as the gatekeeper and forces conversations as residents transit common areas, residents' privacy and their ability to not be door stopped, etc.? I've lost tenants from the property due to this door stopping behaviour.
Yeah, right. I can only assume that potentially this person's also a committee member. Again, it comes down to that dispute resolution process. So obviously that person's there raising particular concerns or issues that they have in relation to the strata scheme. So they feel a need to communicate certain aspects. Maybe their approach is wrong. Maybe it's more of a dictatorial style. So I would perhaps raise the concerns in a friendly manner. And make some suggestions in regards to whatever the issues they are raising, an alternative method for them to be raised amongst the community as a whole. So sometimes raising a problem is one thing, but if you can raise a problem and provide a solution at the same time, it's far easier for people to get on board and be agreeable.
Should lot owner knowledge of the Act and regulations be mandated in some way?
Really good question. I'd love to say yes, but mandated is a very strong word. Maybe for committees there needs to be a base level of education, but again, if you're going to go to that extent, then I think they should be remunerated for that time and effort. Is a strata company prepared to budget that? I don't know, but certainly an increase in knowledge in regards to legislation in all states probably, but particularly Western Australia, will help improve community living. I actually just had another idea from a community, creating communities aspect that I thought I'd share.
Yeah.
Strata companies can consider putting into their budget a small amount each year where maybe they send every new person in the strata scheme a bunch of flowers and a welcome card. It would certainly make them feel very welcome. So it's a suggestion I just thought of.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Wonderful. They do so much work in each of the buildings, don't they? And they really, like a great council of owners, make such a big difference in a building.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you. Bye. If you gained value from this video, please hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're looking for information about parking, strata insurance, defects and more, head over to lookupstrata.com.au or sign up to our free weekly newsletter via the link in the description box below.